The Curse of the Blue Figurine by John Bellairs, Chapter 3. Johnny's eyes grew wide. He felt cold all over. Carefully, with a trembling hand, he put the scroll back in the hollowed book. He was about to close the lid when he heard a noise behind him, a rustling noise, like something moving about. Johnny panicked. He didn't have time for making decisions. What he did was sudden and automatic. He lunged at the book, gathered it up in his arms, and stumbled madly up the steps. He never looked back to see what had made the noise. And when he got to the top of the stairs, Johnny slammed the door and leaned his body against it. He was panting and breathless, and when he looked at his hands, he saw that they were black with dust. The front of his parka was dirty, too. And here was the book in his arms, and inside were the things Father Bart had put into the book. It was all true, then, about Father Bart and the magical something that the mysterious woodcarver had given him. Or was it? Johnny felt that his brain was whirling. Nothing made any sense. He thought about what it said on the scroll. Should he put the book back? No. He was not going down into the basement again, not right away. Then should he drop the book and run? Slowly he walked toward the middle door of the church. He pushed it open and peeked out. Eddie had gone at last. There was no one around, no one at all. With the book clutched tight in his arms, Johnny edged out through the half-open door. He paused for a second more, and then he hurried down the steps. As he tramped along through the snowy streets with the book in his arms, Johnny found that his mind was beginning to clear. He was thinking again. He thought about what Grandma would say if he came waltzing in the front door with this enormous black book. She would be upset about his dirty hands and his dirty parka, and she would certainly get nosy about the book. At the end of his own street, Johnny stopped. He cut across a vacant lot and walked down on Marshland Avenue, which was the next street over. Then he stopped again in front of a big gray house that had a for sale sign on it. This house was directly behind his own house. Johnny had used this sneaky shortcut before, down the driveway, over the bent wire fence, and into his own backyard. From there, Johnny headed straight for the cellar door. It was an old-fashioned cellar entrance, two slanted wooden doors set up against the foundation of the house. These doors were never locked. Grandpa was always going in and out this way, carrying papers to the incinerator or garbage to the garbage cans. Johnny glanced quickly up at the back windows of the house to see if anyone was looking out, and then he opened the doors. Quickly he raced down the steps and dumped the book in a dark corner. Then he raced back up the steps and closed the doors. Whistling softly, Johnny tramped up the snowy driveway and mounted the front steps. He took off his boots and stepped in the front door. He felt very pleased with himself. He had made it. That night, after Grandma and Grandpa had gone to bed, Johnny went down to the cellar and brought up his prize. He carried it to his bedroom, closed the door, and threw the bolt. After putting the book down carefully on the floor, Johnny went to the closet and dug a soiled undershirt out of his laundry bag. He used the undershirt to wipe some of the soot and grime off the old book. Then he opened the cover and knelt there, admiring. He looked like a worshipper, and in fact, that was how he felt. This was, Johnny felt sure, a sacred object, a magic object. He had no doubt that this was the very thing that the mysterious woodcarver had given to Father Bart. Johnny was awestruck and also a little afraid. Should he even touch the statue? Well, he had already touched it and nothing had happened to him. He had done something else, too. He had disobeyed the grim command that Father Bart had written out. He had taken the statue out of the church. Johnny gazed at the little figure that smiled up at him, and he wondered if maybe he had done something foolish. He wanted to talk to somebody about the statue, but who could he talk to? Not Grandma, that was for sure. She would go through the roof if she knew he had this thing. Grandpa would be more understanding, but he would definitely not approve of stealing things from a church. So who could he talk to? The professor, of course! Johnny grinned. Why hadn't he thought of the professor before? The professor was smart and he knew about a lot of things. He probably knew about magic, and he was the one who had told Johnny the story of Father Bart in the first place. He would be very interested in Johnny's discovery. Furthermore, Johnny did not think that the professor would tell on him. The professor was kind of a nut, and nutty people don't rat on you. Nice, friendly, ordinary next-door neighbor types, they would rat on you and think nothing of it, but a nutty person never would. Johnny closed the book up again and carried it to his closet. He put it down in the bottom and heaped old sweatshirts and bare blankets and copies of Boy's Life on top of it. Grandma wasn't nosy. She never poked into Johnny's private things. He figured his treasure would be safe there, for the time being. Days passed. Johnny bided his time, waiting for a chance to go and see the professor. The time came on a Saturday afternoon. Grandma and Grandpa went down to the A&P to shop, and Johnny was left alone in the house. From the bay window in the front parlor he could see the professor's big, gloomy, gray stucco house. The professor's car was sitting in the driveway, so Johnny figured that he had to be home. He ran upstairs to his room and dug the black book out of his closet. In no time at all, he was on the professor's doorstep with the book in his arms. Johnny set the book down on the doormat and pushed the doorbell button. He waited. No answer. Again, he pushed the button, and again. Still nothing. Johnny shifted nervously from one foot to the other. What was the professor doing? Johnny fussed and fretted. He really wanted to talk to the professor, and he wanted to talk to him now. Finally, he got so impatient that he took hold of the knob and turned it. The knob was not locked. It flew right open. Johnny stood and watched as the door swung back. Should he go in? It would certainly not be polite, but what if the professor had had a heart attack? Shouldn't he rush in and try to help him? Johnny decided that the professor needed him. He picked the book up, took a deep breath, and stepped over the threshold. Straight down the long front hall he walked and into the dining room. Nobody there. He peered into the kitchen. There was nobody there either. But on the drain board next to the sink lay a large hinged metal gadget. Johnny knew what it was. It was a jar wrench. You used them to get the lids off bottles and jars. Curiously, Johnny moved closer. He peered into the sink and saw smashed pieces of glass, a jar lid, a lot of olives, and a pool of green brine. Johnny stared at this mess for a few minutes. Then, still holding the book carefully in his arms before him, he moved into the dining room. Now he began to hear muffled thudding and bumping noises. They seemed to be coming from upstairs. Johnny was becoming alarmed. He set the book down on the dining room table and galloped up the stairs. "Professor! Professor!" he called. No answer. Johnny ran down the hall and paused by the door of the room that the noises seemed to be coming from. "Professor, are you all right?" A muffled answer came. "Yes, blast it, I'm all right. Half a minute and I'll be with you." Johnny waited, and presently the door of the room opened. There stood the professor, and he was quite a sight. He was wearing a baggy gray sweatshirt and gray sweatpants. His feet were bare, his hair was a mess, and he was not wearing his glasses. He blinked peevishly at Johnny. Yes, who is it? I can't see a blasted thing without my glasses. And what are you doing here anyway, whoever you are? This is a private home, you know. And if you're selling something, I'm not interested." Johnny was bewildered by this crabby speech. It's me, Professor, Johnny Dixon. I heard these noises. I thought maybe you were being strangled or having a heart attack or something, so I came up." The professor's manner changed. He blinked some more, then he smiled. His cheeks turned red, and Johnny saw that he was really quite embarrassed. "I'll be with you in a moment," the professor muttered. He turned and groped his way over to his desk. More groping, and he found his glasses. He put them on. Ah, yes, it is you, isn't it? And I'll bet you're wondering what I'm doing all dressed up like this, aren't you?" I was, kinda," said Johnny shyly. The professor took Johnny by the arm and led him over to an open closet door. Johnny looked in. He saw that the walls and the floor of the closet were covered with padded gymnasium mats. Taped to the inside of the closet was a hand-lettered sign that said, "To fuss is human, to rant divine." "This is my fuss closet," the professor said casually. "As you know, I have a rotten temper, and I lost it just a few minutes before you came in, because I could not get the lid off that bloody jar downstairs. So I came up here, as I always do in such cases, and I put on these clothes, and took off my glasses, and went into my fuss closet, and I fussed. I cursed and yelled and pounded the walls and floor, and you know, I feel much better now. Sweatier and tireder, perhaps, but better." The professor heaved a deep, self-satisfied sigh and folded his arms. He smiled kindly at Johnny. "Now then, what can I do for you, Johnny was so flabbergasted by the tale of the fuss closet that it took some effort to drag his mind back to what he wanted to talk about. I found something, Professor," he began slowly. "I was kind of poking around in the basement of the church, and I think I found the stuff that woodcarver guy gave to Father Bart." Now it was the professor's turn to be amazed. "Good God!" he exclaimed. "Are you serious? Do you really mean what you just said?" Johnny nodded emphatically. "Uh-huh. It was all inside of a fake book. Do you want to see it? It's downstairs. I brought it over so you could have a look at it." The professor sighed and looked down at the clothes he was wearing. "Well," he said, chuckling, "I hardly feel professional in this get-up, but I would like to have a look at what you found. Sure. Go get the stuff, bring it up, and meanwhile I'll get some shoes on. These floorboards are like ice." A few minutes later, the professor was sitting at his desk with the fake book open before him. Johnny stood behind the desk, next to the professor's chair. The expression on his face was anxious. The room they were in, the room with the fuss closet, was the professor's study. Along one wall was a bookcase made out of bricks and boards. It was full of paperback books. Stacked here and there on the floor were blue exam books with grades and comments scrawled in red ink on their covers. Framed diplomas with gold seals hung crookedly over the bookcase, and next to the desk, piled against it like a rampart, was a wild, disorderly heap of papers and notebooks. In the corner behind the desk stood a stuffed owl on a tall, fluted wooden pillar, and on the owl's head, perched a little to one side, was a small Boston Red Sox baseball cap. The professor harumphed and jiggled around in his chair. Johnny wanted him to get down to business, to start examining the figurine, but the professor liked to take his own time about things. He brushed eraser dust off the faded green blotter that lay on the desk, and he reached into a drawer and took out an ashtray and a small, flat cardboard box. The box was black, and on its lid was a splendid golden two-headed eagle. The lettering on the box said, "Balkan Sobrane." The professor opened the box and peeled back 2 whispery layers of gold leaf paper. Johnny saw in the box a row of black cigarettes with gold tips. As he watched in exasperation, the professor searched in the drawer of his desk for matches. At last he found some. He lit a cigarette and took a deep drag. Then finally he reached out toward the cavity in the hollowed-out book. First he took out the scroll. He unrolled it and read it. His face was absolutely expressionless. He might have been reading the want ads in a daily paper. The professor put the scroll back in the box, carefully using both hands. He lifted out the blue figurine. Johnny was on pins and needles. He watched as the professor examined the thing, puffed on his cigarette and said several times, and pulled the floor lamp closer to his desk. Now the professor tilted the figurine up so he could look at its base. Johnny noticed for the first time there was a small, faded brown paper label on the base. The professor adjusted his glasses and peered closer. Then he let out a whoop of laughter. He set the figurine down, threw back his head, and roared. "Ha! That's a good one!" exclaimed the professor, pounding his hand on the desk. Johnny was startled and utterly bewildered. "What? What is it?" The professor giggled some more. Then he picked up the figurine and held it so Johnny could see the label. "Here, have a look. This is funny. It really is. See? Right there. There it is." Johnny looked. There was printing on the faded brown label, old-fashioned Victorian ornamental printing. It said, "Souvenir of Cairo, Illinois." And that's the end of Chapter 3.